The topic of today's event is extremely critical and timely. And as you said, coming 1 year after the murder of George Floyd, this discussion is very apropos. Uh, I have been asked to speak about the issue of police brutality in Grenada. Grenada, the tiny island in the Caribbean that made world history in 1979 when it overthrew a dictatorship of a man by the name of Eric Gairy, a ruthless autocrat who had misruled the Grenadian people throughout the 1970s and was finally overthrown in a people's uprising, in a rebellion, a popular rebellion, a popular revolution, actually, that took place on March the 13th, 1979, and that brought to power a revolutionary vanguard party known as the New Jewel Movement, and that was led by the Prime Minister, Brother Maurice Bishop, who went on to become the revolutionary Prime Minister and leader of the Grenada Revolution. That happened in 1979, and unfortunately, only 4.5 years later, the revolution was in fact overthrown by a counter-revolutionary coup that took place inside of the ruling party and government of Grenada, and led to the brutal assassination of Maurice Bishop and a number of other members of the Grenada government, and members of the cabinet, leaders of the New Jewel movement itself. And a few days later, after those tragic events took place, a few days later, the U.S. military, under under the command of President Ronald Reagan, who was a president of the U.S. at that time, invaded Grenada in a really brutal invasion that brought Grenada, basically killed the revolution. After the revolution had imploded, the invasion made sure to put the last nail in the coffin of the revolution. And U.S. imperialism at the time claimed the invasion to be a great victory for the forces of freedom in the Americas. Not going to go into too much detail on the 4.5 years of accomplishments in Grenada during the period of the People's Revolutionary Government, except to say that as it relates to today's topic, the police brutality in Grenada did not exist during the time of the revolution, in the 4.5 years. It was simply a non-issue. And the basic reason was that during that period of time, the revolution established a People's Revolutionary Government, established a socialist state, and involved all of the people of the country in the process of developing the island economically, socially, politically. They were involved in the democratic process of developing the country. But prior to the revolution coming into existence in 1979, during the period of the dictatorship, especially in the 1970s, the Grenadian people experienced a period of police brutality that was, even by Caribbean standards, truly deplorable. A couple of major incidents happened during the 70s that helped to energize the revolutionary movement and the anti-dictatorship movement in the latter part of that decade, leading eventually to the overthrow of the dictatorship. What happened in 1973? Just to give you an example of police brutality in Grenada. the dictator had, in fact, his own sort of a version of the Tonton Macoute in Haiti under Duvalier. And this paramilitary goon squad was known as the Mongoose Gang. And they answered only to the dictator. They were not accountable to any state institution or any popular institution, not accountable to the parliament of the country at the time, accountable only to the dictator. And under his command in 1973, while a popular demonstration was taking place against the dictatorship, led by Maurice Bishop and his father. His father's name was Rupert Bishop. They were both leading a demonstration of thousands of people against the dictatorship. And Bishop's father, Rupert, was shot dead in the back in 1973, in the back. Following that horrible event, a few years later, exactly 3 years later, Maurice Bishop himself was set upon by this paramilitary goon squad and was beaten almost to the point of death. Fortunately, he did survive and, in fact, went on to lead the New Jewel movement in the revolution in 1979. During the 4.5 years in power, as I said, the revolution eliminated police brutality because the police force was under the control and command of the revolutionary state. It's kind of sounds a little bit foreign, I'm sure, to sisters and brothers here in the US, but it has happened, and it continues to happen in revolutionary Cuba, for example. The police force in Cuba is under the control and command of the revolutionary state of Cuba. And so no violence or aggressive behavior towards the people was permitted during the time of the Grenada Revolution, during that period of time. Also, it's notable that that crime fell dramatically during the revolutionary period. Let me just draw a couple of very interesting connections or similarities, you might say, or between Malcolm X, whose birthday we celebrated a few days ago, and Maurice Bishop, whose birthday is coming up on the 29th of May. A number of similarities between the two of them. They were, of course, both fighters for the liberation of their people. That was something common to the two of them. Malcolm X's writings and Malcolm X's speeches had a profound influence on the shaping of Maurice Bishop's political consciousness, as well as the consciousness of other leaders of the New Jewel movement. So there was that synergy there. Both were born in May, as I said, but I'm sure most of our listeners or most of our viewers did not know that they also shared the fact that Malcolm X's mother, her name was Louise Little, was actually born in Grenada. Malcolm's mother was born in Grenada, yes, in the year 1897, and she died in 1989. Like her husband, Earl Little, Malcolm's father, Louise was a devout Garveyite, a follower of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and she worked for a number of years for Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. A little bit of a history of a remarkable woman who has not been given her due, to date anyway. So I will sum up by saying that if Malcolm and Maurice were alive today, Malcolm would have been 97 years old, and Maurice would have been 74, I believe. I am sure that they would have found a way to involve themselves, in the case of the U.S., in the building of a popular resistance movement to police brutality here in the United States, and beyond that, to contribute to the growing and expanding global movement for racial equity, for accountability, the global anti-capitalist, anti-white supremacy movement that swept the world in the wake of George Floyd's murder. I recall looking at demonstrations last spring and summer that broke out in not only in hundreds of cities and towns in the United States, but in major cities in Europe. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets in London and Paris and Rome. There were demonstrations in places as far as Japan and in Australia and New Zealand, where there has always been a strong resistance movement to white supremacy in those two countries by the native peoples of Australia, the Aboriginal peoples, and by the native peoples of New Zealand, the Maori peoples. So they turned out in support and solidarity with the demonstrations in New York. So what we witnessed for a short, all too brief period was manifestations of a global solidarity for racial justice and for equity that I have not experienced anything in my many years as an activist, anything close to what we witnessed last year. So the question we have to pose to ourselves is what happens with all of that revolutionary energy 1 year after? Where do we go from here? And I look forward to the opinions and the viewpoints of my fellow panelists as we struggle with that and other questions, other pressing questions that confront the movement a year after the death of George Floyd. So I'll pause there, and again, greetings to all the sisters and brothers and comrades who have joined us this evening.